In the last episode, we were able to talk about some of the major ideological differences between the Soviet Union and the United States during the Cold War, and how some groups, like the non-aligned movement, chose to avoid these entanglements and tried to forge their own way. Not everyone as lucky as the non-aligned movement, though. In fact, a large portion of the world suffered from interventions of one kind or another during the Cold War, from one side or from both. So first, let's talk about the new alliances that are formed as each side draws allies into its orbit. The United States begins NATO, or the North Atlantic Treaty Organization. The primary members of this are the Western European democracies and Canada. On the other hand are the Soviet Union and its satellite countries, and they form the Warsaw Pact. The Warsaw Pact is formed as a defensive alliance against NATO. The two sides think they need this defensive alliance because of a nasty little thing called nuclear proliferation. Shortly after the United States becomes a nuclear power, the Soviet Union follows, and one by one, other countries start to join in the ranks of nations who have the power to destroy worlds. Dan Carlin, the history podcaster I speak of often, has a really excellent episode on how nuclear weapons actually ended the style of warfare that we saw in World War II. He talks about how with nuclear weapons, real war can't really be pursued because the risk of nuclear annihilation is too large. He goes on to talk about how much nuclear weapons impact the executives of the nations who have them. For example, never before in human history did one single person hold the power to destroy the world. Now, there are several people on the planet who, with only one command, can end us. That's a lot of power, and it certainly went right to their heads. It did, however, also force them to develop a line of communication. The US president and the Soviet premier had to have a direct line of communication so that they could warn each other of any mishaps. It also created a situation called MAD, or Mutually Assured Destruction. Because both the US and USSR were continuously adding to their stockpiles of nuclear armaments during the Cold War arms race, it became increasingly apparent that the use of a nuclear bomb by one side would ensure nuclear retaliation by the other side. Hence, if you were going to use your nukes, you needed to be ready to also get hit. Not optimal. So, the more nukes there were, the less likely they were to actually be used. But this tension had to be released somehow, and the way that it ended up being released was through proxy wars, where the US would back one side of a conflict in a third world country, and the USSR would back the other side. This meant that the battle between communist totalitarianism and democratic capitalism would play out, but on a smaller scale, and more limited, and sometimes with even plausible deniability. This happened in Korea, China, Vietnam, Afghanistan, Cuba, various Latin American countries like Guatemala and Chile, the Congo, Angola, and so on. Basically, if you were gaining independence from a European country in the 1950s and 1960s, you could guarantee that the USA and the USSR were going to compete to influence you and maybe even support different factions within your independence movement. This often led to drawn-out civil wars that were bankrolled essentially by either the US and the USSR. I'm not going to get into the specifics of any one conflict here, but please note that on our Unit 8 resources page, I have individual videos for each of these different locations for you to learn more. That's it for today. Thanks for watching. Like and subscribe, as always, so that you don't miss out on any AP World History content.